The yacht smelled of salt and something burned. Not fire, but the particular acrid note of electrical systems that had failed slowly, over time, the way expensive things sometimes do when no one is watching closely enough. She was called the Meridian, 94 feet of Italian composite hull, and she sat in her slip at the Harborview Marina in Newport with the quiet, humiliated stillness of something built for motion that could no longer move. The marina manager had described her, in writing, as a total electrical loss. The surveyor's report ran to 22 pages. 5 separate engineering firms had reviewed those pages, and each had arrived at the same conclusion, delivered in the careful language of professionals who do not like to be wrong. The Meridian's integrated power and propulsion management system was, in their collective judgment, unrecoverable without a full replacement of her primary control architecture, a process that would take 8 months and cost, conservatively, $2.4 million. Vivienne Ashworth Cole, who was the founder and chief executive of Ashworth Maritime Holdings, and who had purchased the Meridian at a Monaco broker auction for $6 million the previous spring, stood on the dock with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She had been on 3 calls before 9 in the morning. She was on her 4th when a man in a faded canvas work jacket arrived at the slip, carrying a single aluminum case and a canvas tool roll. And she looked at him, the way people sometimes look at things that have arrived in the wrong place. "I was told someone competent was coming," she said, not quite to him and not quite to anyone else. She did not know that the man's name was Daniel Voss. She did not know that before he had moved to this small coastal town, before he had opened the one bay repair shop on the industrial edge of Wickham Street that his daughter called the Quiet Place, Daniel Voss had spent 11 years as the lead systems integration engineer at Peregrine Marine Technologies, a firm whose clients included 3 NATO navies and a handful of private owners whose names appeared on no public list. He had held 2 patents in distributed marine power architecture. He had once rebuilt a propulsion management system aboard a vessel in the Barents Sea in winter, with a reduced parts inventory and no shore support, and the vessel had made port on schedule. He did not advertise. He did not have a website. He charged fairly. She had no idea what she had called in. Stay with this one to the end. Every detail is here for a reason. The morning light fell flat and cold across the dock, and Daniel set his aluminum case down on the non-skid surface of the Meridian swim platform without ceremony. He unlatched the case, lifted the lid, and stood for a moment looking at the organized interior, meters and probes, and a fiber optic inspection scope nested in foam cutouts, each in its place, each labeled in his own small handwriting and strips of white tape. He did not look back at Vivienne Ashworth Cole. He crouched, selected a clamp meter and a voltage probe, and began at the primary junction panel, working left to right the way he always began. Not because the problem was necessarily there, but because a system had to be read from the beginning if it was going to be read correctly. Daniel Voss was 38 years old. He had a daughter named Mara, who was 7, and Mara carried everywhere a small stuffed penguin she had named Edmund, after a character in a book Claire used to read to her. Claire had been Daniel's wife. She had died of a brain aneurysm 22 months after Mara was born, on a Tuesday in March, without warning, in the kitchen of the apartment they had shared in Oslo, while Daniel was finishing the Barents Sea contract. He had flown home to a daughter who was too young to understand what had happened and old enough to know that something had changed permanently. He had looked at the trajectory of his career, the travel, the remote deployments, the vessels in cold water far from any shore. And he had made a calculation that had nothing to do with engineering. Mara needed a parent who was present. He had chosen to be that parent. He had moved back to the United States, to the small coastal town of Wickham, where his mother had grown up, and he had opened the shop on Wickham Street. It was not much to look at. One bay, a pegboard wall of organized tools arranged by type and size, a second-hand oscilloscope on a steel rolling cart, a folding table near the window where Mara did her homework on the afternoons she came after school. The sign above the door said Voss Marine Service in plain black letters on white. He had been there 4 years. The people who knew what he could do sent him work quietly, the way people pass along the name of a doctor they trust. He did not seek larger commissions. He had not sought this one either. It had come to him through a harbor master in Newport, who had worked alongside Daniel on a Navy contract 6 years prior, and who had, after watching 5 engineering firms fail to solve the Meridian's problem, made a single phone call. The harbor master's name was Roy Beckett. Roy had not told Vivian Ashworth Cole much about Daniel. He had said only that Daniel was the right person for this job, and that she should let him work without interference. Vivian had agreed because she was out of options, and because the Meridian was costing her $14,000 a month in slip fees and insurance while she sat dead in the water. She had not asked Roy what Daniel's credentials were. She had assumed from the canvas jacket and the single aluminum case and the truck with the cracked side mirror parked at the marina entrance that she was dealing with someone local, someone adequate, someone who would confirm what the buy firms had already told her and perhaps do it more cheaply. She had finished her coffee before Daniel had finished his initial inspection of the Meridian's primary junction panel. He was still crouching, still reading voltage across each breaker position, with the methodical patience of a man who does not skip steps, when she reappeared at the companionway. "Well," she said. "I'll know more this afternoon," he said, without looking up. She waited. He did not add anything. She went back up the dock toward the marina office, and the sound of her footsteps faded against the planking, and Daniel was alone with the Meridian and the smell of her damaged systems and the particular quiet of a problem that had not yet been solved. That was a Tuesday. He worked through Tuesday and into Wednesday morning before he spoke again to anyone other than Roy Beckett. What he found inside the Meridian's control architecture was not, in his assessment, unrecoverable. It was, however, the kind of damage that required patience rather than replacement. The kind of failure that looked catastrophic from the outside because the people examining it had been trained to replace rather than restore. The primary control bus had suffered a cascade fault, originating from a corroded ground connection at the secondary distribution panel, a connection that had been installed incorrectly at the factory and had been degrading for years behind a composite panel that no standard inspection protocol required removing. The cascade had propagated through the integrated management system in a pattern that looked, on a standard diagnostic readout, like total system failure. It was not total. It was sequential. And sequential failures, Daniel knew, had sequential solutions. He spent Wednesday morning tracing the propagation path node by node, logging each step in a small spiral notebook with a mechanical pencil, the measurements precise to 3 decimal places. He photographed each fault point with a compact camera he kept in the lid pocket of his aluminum case. The images time-stamped and numbered. By midday, he had traced the cascade through 11 of its 17 nodes. He ate a sandwich on the dock without sitting down, standing with one foot on the swim platform and his notebook open in his hand, reviewing what he had written. Then he went back inside. He called Roy on Wednesday afternoon. "Tell her it's fixable," he said. "Tell her I need 12 days. Roy called back 20 minutes later. "She wants to know the cost." Daniel gave him a number. It was not $2.4 million. It was not close to $2.4 million. Roy was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and then he said, "I'll tell her." Vivian Ashworth Cole's response, relayed through Roy, was a single sentence. Is he serious, or is he incompetent? Roy had told her he was serious. She had said she would wait and see. The folding table in Daniel's shop had a dent on the left corner from the time Mara had pushed it against the pegboard wall during a game she had invented and never fully explained. On the Thursday of that first week, Mara came to the marina after school instead of to the shop because Daniel had not yet returned to Wickham Street, and she rode the afternoon bus to the harbor stop and walked down the dock with Edmund tucked under her arm. She found her father in the Meridian's engine room, lying on his back, with a fiber optic inspection scope in one hand and a pencil in the other, marking a sequence of notations in the spiral notebook he had propped against his knee. She sat on the non-skid beside the open hatch and watched him work. After a while, she said, "Is the boat broken?" "Part of it," he said. She considered this. She held Edmund by one flipper, which was her habit when she was thinking. "Which part?" she asked. "The part that tells the other parts what to do," he said. She thought about that for another moment. Then she said, "Edmund's ear was broken like that once. You fixed it." He did not answer immediately. He made another notation, turned the scope slightly to follow a wire run deeper into the bilge, and read the image on the small screen. Then he said, "I remember." She seemed satisfied with this. She opened her backpack, took out a worksheet, and began working on it there on the dock beside the hatch. With the smell of salt water and marine-grade epoxy around her, and the sound of her pencil moving steadily across the paper, and Daniel worked below, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. That was the kind of quiet that needed no translation. Vivian Ashworth Cole had not returned to the marina on Thursday. She had, however, made inquiries. Her assistant, a composed and thorough young woman named Priya Anand, had spent Thursday afternoon on the phone and on her laptop, working through the sparse public record of Voss Marine Service and finding very little. No website, no reviews on any platform. A business license filed in Wickham County 4 years prior. A single mention in a regional maritime trade publication from 2 years ago. A brief item about a propulsion repair on a commercial fishing vessel that had been considered a write-off by 2 separate marine surveyors before the owner had called Wickham Street. Priya had noted the item, noted the vessel owner's subsequent comments. He had described the repair as the best work he had seen in 30 years of commercial fishing, and had flagged it for Vivian without editorializing. Vivian had read the flag and moved on to other things. She had a board meeting in 2 days and a charter commitment in 6 weeks that the Meridian's current condition made impossible. She needed the boat fixed. She did not yet need to revise her opinion of the man fixing it. Priya had kept looking. What Priya found on Friday morning, working through a subscription database of maritime engineering patents, was a filing from 8 years prior, a co-authored patent for a distributed fault isolation protocol in integrated marine power systems assigned to Peregrine Marine Technologies. One of the 2 inventors listed was a D. Voss, with an address in Oslo, Norway. She cross-referenced the name against a Peregrine press release from 6 years prior, a brief announcement about a successful systems restoration aboard a vessel operating in Arctic conditions, and found a photograph. The man in the photograph was younger, and he was wearing a Peregrine-branded fleece instead of a canvas jacket. But the face was the same face she had seen on the dock Monday morning. The man Vivian had described in Priya's presence as probably adequate. Priya printed the photograph, the patent filing, and the press release. She set the 3 pages on Vivian's desk in a neat stack, aligned at the corners, without comment. Vivian picked up the stack. She read each page in order. She set them back down. She did not say anything for a moment. And then she said, "Get me the full Peregrine file." She said it quietly. It was a different register than the one she had used on the dock. The full Peregrine file arrived on Vivian's desk by Friday afternoon, assembled by Priya from patent databases, archived naval procurement documents, and a technical monograph published in a Norwegian marine engineering journal that had to be translated. Vivian read it over the weekend. She did not return to the marina on Saturday. She did not return on Sunday. But on Monday morning, when she arrived at the slip, she did not bring her phone to her ear. She stood at the dock's edge and watched Daniel work through the Meridian's open companionway, and she did not say anything at all for several minutes. She watched him move a thermal imaging camera slowly across the face of the secondary distribution panel, reading the heat signature on a small display clipped to the handrail beside him, pausing at each point of interest to log a measurement before moving on. The quality of her silence was different from the silence she had kept before. Daniel did not notice the difference. Or if he did not show it. On day 6, he found the secondary fault node he had suspected since Wednesday, a hairline fracture in a laminated bus bar, invisible to standard diagnostic equipment, detectable only by thermal imaging at load, and by the particular pattern of voltage drop he had been mapping in his spiral notebook since the first afternoon. The fracture was 11 millimeters long and ran at a 17-degree angle across the laminate, following the grain of the copper substrate in a way that suggested it had originated during manufacture, not in service. He photographed it at 3 different focal lengths, measured the resistance across it with a 4-wire milliometer, and logged the result. He did not call Roy. He did not call Vivian. He worked until the marina's dock lights came on, casting their orange glow across the water and the white hulls in the neighboring slips. And then he packed his case, locked the Meridian's companionway, and drove back to Wickham Street. He made dinner. Mara told him about a project she was doing on tide pools. He listened the way he always listened, completely, as if there were nothing else in the world requiring his attention. On day 8, a man named Gil Nakamura arrived at the slip at 7 in the morning with a thermos of coffee and a soft-sided case of diagnostic tools. Gil was 51, with the kind of hands that told their own story, scarred across the knuckles, the nails permanently darkened at the corners from a career spent inside machinery. He had worked with Daniel at Peregrine for 4 years before leaving to run his own electrical contracting business in Providence. He had not been called. He had called Daniel. He had heard, through the narrow channel of people who knew what Daniel could do, that Daniel was working something complicated alone. And he had said he would come. He did not ask about the fee. There was no fee. That was not the arrangement they had. Gil worked the port side distribution runs while Daniel addressed the starboard integration bus, and they communicated in the compressed language of people who have worked together in confined spaces. Short confirmations, tool names, numbers called across the bilge. By the end of day 8, they had isolated and documented every node in the cascade sequence, 17 in total, each one photographed and logged with its position, its failure mode, and its measured resistance deviation from factory specification. Each entry in the notebook included the node number, its coordinates on Daniel's hand-drawn schematic, and its relationship to the nodes upstream and downstream in the cascade. It was the kind of documentation that took longer than the repair itself. Daniel did it anyway, because the documentation was the proof, and the proof was the point. Mara came to the marina again on day 9. She sat at the top of the companionway ladder with Edmund in her lap and watched Gil splice a replacement segment into the port distribution run with the focused attention she brought to everything she found interesting. The splice was a precise operation, a crimped marine-grade terminal on each end, heat shrink applied with a small torch, the finished joint wrapped in self-amalgamating tape and labeled with a white marker in Gil's block handwriting. After a while, she asked Gil what he was doing. Fixing the part that was lying to the other parts, Gil said without looking up from the torch. She considered this seriously. Edmund lied once, she said. He told me there wasn't a monster. There was. Gil looked at Daniel. Daniel did not look up from his notebook, but the corner of his mouth moved briefly in a way that was not quite a smile and was not quite nodding. She seemed satisfied that the information had been received. She opened her backpack and began her homework, and the sound of the marina settled around all of them. The slap of water on fiberglass, the distant engine of a workboat turning over somewhere in the inner harbor, the scratch of a 7-year-old's pencil on paper, and the work continued. On day 11, Vivian Ashworth Cole came aboard for the first time in the initial inspection. She came alone without her phone, which Priya had noted as unusual when Vivian had left the office. She stood in the main saloon and looked at the organized precision of Daniel's work surface. The labeled components in their individual foam-lined trays, the spiral notebook open to a page dense with circuit notation and hand-drawn node maps, the photographs clipped in sequence to a length of shock cord strung between 2 handholds, each image numbered in the lower right corner with a fine tip marker. She did not touch anything. She looked at it for a long time. "How much longer?" she said. "1 day," Daniel said. He was in the bilge. His voice came up through the access panel, even and unhurried. She waited as if expecting more. He did not offer more. She climbed back up to the dock, and Daniel heard her footsteps move away along the planking, and he went back to work. On day 12, at 11:47 in the morning, Daniel powered the Meridian's primary control bus for the first time since the cascade failure. He did it in stages the way the protocol required. Not all at once, but sequentially, node by node, watching the readout on his oscilloscope at each step, confirming continuity and checking for any residual voltage anomaly before advancing to the next position. Gill stood at the secondary panel with a clamp meter and called readings in a steady voice. The marina was quiet around them. Breeze moved over the outer harbor. A powerboat passed the breakwater, and its wake reached the slip a minute later, rocking the Meridian gently in her lines. There was no drama in the moment. There was only the measured sequence of a system returning to itself, one verified step at a time. At 12:22, the integrated management display on the Meridian's helm console illuminated. All systems nominal. The words appeared in the same font they had always appeared in, on the same screen, as if nothing had happened. Daniel looked at the display for a moment. He made a notation in his notebook, recording the time and the final voltage readings at the primary bus. Then he closed the notebook, capped his pen, and said, "That's it." Gill said, "Yeah." He poured 2 cups from the thermos. They drank them standing in the cockpit, looking at the harbor, and neither of them said anything else for a while. That was enough. The documentation package Daniel delivered to Vivian Ashworth Cole 3 days later ran to 41 pages. It contained a full photographic record of every fault node, a written analysis of the cascade sequence and its origin at the factory-installed ground connection, a schematic of the repair sequence with annotated measurements at each stage, and a final system verification log signed by both Daniel and Gill and countersigned, at Daniel's request, by a marine surveyor named Harold Fenn. Harold Fenn was 73 years old and had been a certified marine surveyor for 31 years. He had surveyed vessels for Lloyd's of London, for the American Bureau of Shipping, and for a number of private clients whose standards exceeded both. He had not been easy to reach, and he had not been inexpensive. Daniel had requested him specifically because Harold Fenn's signature on a document meant something in every harbor on the eastern seaboard, and Daniel wanted the Meridian's recovery to mean something that could not be argued with. Harold, 4 hours aboard the Meridian, reviewing the documentation and running his own independent systems checks with his own instruments. He had tested each repair node against the factory specification values Daniel had sourced from the original Peregrine build documentation, and he had found every reading within tolerance. He had then written a 1-page assessment in his characteristically spare prose, concluding that the Meridian's integrated power and propulsion management system had been fully and correctly restored to original factory specification, that the repair methodology demonstrated a level of diagnostic precision he had not encountered in private practice, and that the vessel was, in his professional judgment, seaworthy in all electrical respects. He signed it with the stamp of his certification number and the date. Vivian read the package in her office. She read it twice. She set it on her desk and sat with it for a moment. And then she called Priya in and said, "Arrange a sea trial. This week." The sea trial was conducted on a Thursday morning, with Harold Fenn aboard as the independent observer, and with the captain Vivian had retained for the Meridian's charter season at the helm. The Meridian left her slip at Harborview Marina at 8:15 and returned at 12:40. She performed without fault across every system. The captain, a careful man named Sorensen, who had been sailing professionally for 20 years and who was not given to enthusiasm, said afterward that the boat felt better than she had when he had first taken command of her before the failure. He said it once, standing on the dock, and did not repeat it. Harold Fenn noted the remark in a brief addendum to his assessment, dated and stamped. Vivian was on the dock when the Meridian came in. She watched the lines go over. She watched Captain Sorensen step off and speak briefly with Harold Fenn, and she watched Harold Fenn's nod once, with the economy of a man who does not nod unless he means it. Then she walked to where Daniel was standing, near the stern, coiling a length of line that did not need coiling. "I said something," she said, "the morning you arrived. On the dock." He did not answer. He kept his hands on the line. "It was not a fair assessment," she said. "I want to say that plainly." He looked up then, briefly, and then back at his hands. "You were working with the information you had," he said. She was quiet for a moment. It was the kind of quiet that comes from rapid internal calculation, from a person revising a category in real time. Then she said, "I have 3 other vessels in the fleet. 2 of them have had recurring electrical issues that haven't been resolved. I'd like to discuss whether you'd be willing to look at them." He set the line down on the dock. He stood up straight. "Send me the survey reports," he said. "I'll let you know." He did not say yes. He did not say no. He picked up his aluminum case and his canvas tool roll, and he walked up the dock toward the parking area. And that was all. Priya had watched the exchange from near the marina office. She had watched Vivian's posture change as she spoke, the small shift in the set of her shoulders that Priya had learned in 3 years of working alongside her to recognize as the physical expression of a recalibration. She had also watched the man in the canvas jacket walk away without looking back, and she had thought privately that she had been right about him since Friday morning, and that being right first was its own quiet satisfaction. There was a man from one of the fake original engineering firms who had been at the marina that Thursday for an unrelated survey. His name was not important. He had seen the Meridian come in under her own power, had seen Harold Fenn on the dock, had understood what the sea trial meant, and had left without speaking to anyone. He did not shake hands with Vivian. He did not speak to Daniel. He walked to his car and drove out of the parking area, and the story did not follow him. Daniel drove back to Wickham Street. It was early afternoon, and Mara was still in school, and the shop was quiet. He unlocked the bay door and went inside and set his case on the workbench and stood for a moment in the particular stillness of a space that was his, that smelled of soda flux and machine oil. and the faint cedar of the pegboard. He did not feel triumphant. He felt finished, which was a different thing, and in some ways a better one. He made a cup of coffee and sat at the folding table where Mara did her homework, and he opened his spiral notebook to a clean page, and he began writing the invoice. He wrote it by hand the way he always did. He listed each repair stage separately with the corresponding materials cost and the labor hours, and he totaled it at the bottom in the same mechanical pencil he had used in the Meridian's bilge. He took his time. At 3:45, the afternoon bus stopped at the corner of Wickham Street, and Mara came through the bay door with her backpack on and Edmund under her arm. She looked at her father at the folding table and then around the shop, taking inventory the way she did, checking that everything was where it belonged. "Is the boat fixed?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already known. She sat down across from him, took out her homework, and began. Edmund sat on the edge of the table, facing the window, looking out at Wickham Street in the late afternoon light. And the shop was quiet around them, and the overhead light above the workbench cast its rectangle across the concrete floor, warm and steady and unchanged. That was where the day ended, not with ceremony, not with a phone call or a wire transfer or a handshake in a boardroom, with a man and his daughter at a folding table with a dent on the left corner, doing the ordinary work of an ordinary afternoon, in a shop on a street in a small coastal town, where the light came in level and unhurried through a west-facing window and lay across the floor like something that had always been there and intended to stay. The invoice took him 40 minutes to write. He dated it, folded it into thirds, and set it in the outgoing tray on the workbench, a wire tray he had mounted to the pegboard 4 years ago, and that held, at any given time, a small and orderly record of work completed and sent out into the world. Then he turned off the shop light, locked the bay door, and drove home. The house was a rental on Calder Street, 7 minutes from the shop, with a narrow driveway and a garage that was too small for the truck, and so served instead as a second storage space for tools he used less often, and the bicycle Mara had not yet grown into. The garage light was on when he pulled in, a single bulb in a porcelain fixture he had replaced himself the first winter, because the original had flickered in a way that bothered him. It burned steady now, the way he had set it to burn, casting a pale cone across the driveway's cracked asphalt. He sat in the truck for a moment after he cut the engine, not thinking about the Meridian, not thinking about Vivian Ashworth's Cole or Harold Fenn or the 41 pages or the sea trial or any of it, just sitting in the quiet of a day that had ended correctly. Mara was asleep when he went inside. She had made it to her bed, which was not always the case on school nights, and Edmund was tucked beside her with one flipper extended across the pillow, the way he always was. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment, not long, and then he pulled the door to and went to the kitchen and rinsed his coffee cup and stood at the window over the sink. The garage light was still visible from there, through the side window, a steady pale square against the dark. There is a certain kind of knowledge that does not announce itself. It does not carry credentials in its front pocket or speak first in a room. It waits. It looks carefully and for a long time at the thing everyone else has already decided about, and it finds in that patient looking what the quick glance missed. Most things that are called unrecoverable have simply not yet met the right quality of attention. Daniel Voss knew this. He had always known it. He had built a life around it quietly, on a street in a small coastal town, in a shop where the light came in level, through a west-facing window, and a child did her homework at a folding table, and the work was done without ceremony, and done right, and done Khmer completely. The garage light burned on through the night. It did not flicker.